You may not think much about where your milk comes from and how it gets from the cow to your table, but a new grant awarded to community involved in sustaining agriculture might change that. It's going to help gather research for use in raising awareness about dairy farms. Carolee McGrath sat down to talk with the communications manager for CISA about the recent grant and the state of local dairy agriculture.
We got some funding through the Mass Dairy Promotion Board, which is a statewide organization that exists to promote dairy farms in the state. We have been working with them for the last 5 or 6 years, and we work with partners throughout the state to promote dairy farms, to talk about what's happening on dairy farms in Massachusetts, and to tell some of the stories directly from the dairy farms that we work with throughout the region. We are also using some of the funding to work with a UMass Amherst professor who is going to conduct a study to help us determine how much it costs dairy farmers to produce milk. We have found that having localized information about that is really useful to understanding the challenges that dairy farms face, and it's useful for them too to have access to that information.
And tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that dairy farmers do face today.
Most of the milk that's produced in the state is sold into wholesale markets. So something that's interesting about dairy is that it's actually a very functional system. All of the milk that's produced in the state, with the exception of a small group of farms that are making their own cheese or making their own yogurt or processing their own milk on farm, all of that milk is entering a wholesale system where milk is purchased, it's shipped, it's processed into different products, and then it's sold out to grocery stores and other industries. And so in a system like that, there is very little waste. There is somewhere for all of the milk to go. And the dairy farmers themselves don't have to manage, their very highly perishable product. They don't have to manage it, and they don't have to market it. So most of the milk that's produced in the state enters that system. And in a lot of ways that is ideal. The problem is that the price that dairy farmers get paid is set on a federal level. That has been in place since the New Deal. That was a Depression-era policy that was set up, and the price that farmers get paid for their milk does not cover their costs. And they have been struggling in a situation like that where it costs them more to produce a product than they're able to sell it for.
So how do they sustain themselves? How do they stay in business?
Yeah, so there are some state programs that support them, and those are really important. A lot of dairy farms subsidize their dairy production with other types of products on their farms. A lot of them are reliant on family members having off-farm jobs, and on family members helping out on the farm and not being paid. It's really a pretty intense situation for a lot of people because producing milk is part of people's family histories. They really see it as an important contribution that they're making to the food and to the circumstance in the state, the economic circumstance in the state. So people are really dedicated to keeping their cows for as long as they can, and they make up those gaps, in a lot of ways around the edges.
Right.
And they shouldn't have to. They should be paid enough to produce the product that we consume and we value so much in the state.
How much do we consume when we go to the grocery store and we buy a gallon of milk? How much of it is coming from Massachusetts?
Massachusetts dairy farms produce about 20% of the milk that's consumed in the state.
Yeah.
Yes. Milk moves through a regional market, so some of that milk is leaving the state and being turned into other products, but it's about 20% of the total volume of milk that we consume here.
So obviously the big push always is to buy local, right? I mean, that's the big thing that would help people.
Yeah, what we always say is that milk is really a local and regional product. The milk that is produced by farms here in Massachusetts is being processed and sold regionally. And the milk that we're buying some comes from Massachusetts farms and some comes from neighboring states. And that's really unique. Like, you can't go into a grocery store and just feel that confident about a zucchini or, hamburger or anything else like that. So yeah, if you want to support local dairy farms, drink milk. It's a really straightforward step for consumers to take.
Tell us a little bit about the dairy farmers, or how many there are, I guess, in Western Massachusetts, and what you're hearing, personally from them as they, try to deal with some of the challenges that they have.
Yeah. So We just had a new ag census come out. That is a huge federal study that comes out every 5 years and gives us updated information about all types of farms and all sorts of industries. So the last count was that there are 140 farms that are primarily producing milk in the state of Massachusetts. I think about 50 of them are in our 3-county region here. Most of those are in Franklin County, I think 36 or so. So most of the dairy farms in the state are in western Massachusetts, which are the more agricultural regions. And something that I like to highlight is that we have a very small number of dairy farms left in the state. I think the total number of dairy farms makes up less than 2% of farms left in the state, but they have a really outsized impact on our environmental land base and on our economic system. They steward 10% of agricultural land, that fewer than 2% steward 10% of agricultural land, and they generate 9% of agricultural sales. So they're a small number of the farms, total farms in the state, but they matter a lot to our agricultural economy and to our agricultural land base. So that's one piece of the puzzle about why it's so important to maintain them. But in terms of the question about what we're hearing from dairy farms, mostly what we hear from dairy farms is that they care a lot about maintaining the legacy of raising cows and caring for animals and maintaining their land base. And they want to be able to keep doing that. And there's really no reason that they shouldn't be able to. They know what they're doing in terms of animal care and husbandry. They know what they're doing in terms of land management. They have an infrastructure system that is set up and that makes sense and that it's very efficient, it results in very little waste. And they're producing a product that there's a lot of demand for. So the fact that they are struggling to make ends meet, I think the other piece is that they work really, really hard too. Raising livestock is not something that you can do casually. Their animals require care every single day of the year, and they do that. So the fact that they don't get paid enough to cover their costs is, it's not because they don't know how to run their businesses or because of any flaw on the farm side. It's really a policy issue. And we see that there's just not the political will right now, it seems, to change that. So dairy farmers are trying to figure out how they can continue to survive in that circumstance.